LiSTNR production.
A warning. This episode contains references to sexual assault, child sexual abuse, and violence against children. If this content does affect you, the number for Lifeline is 13 11 14. On the 26th of January, 1966, Adelaide was caught in a sweltering heatwave. To cool off, 3 young siblings caught the bus to Glenelg Beach, telling their mother they'd be back by noon. When the children didn't return, their parents became concerned. A search began and police were notified of their disappearance. Within just 24 hours, the entire nation was gripped by the search for the children. 22 years later, in 1988, then Detective Bill Hayes took on the case, and now, almost 60 years after their disappearance, he's still trying to solve the case of the missing Beaumont children. I'm former police officer Brent Sanders, and for the past 25 years, I've dedicated myself to sharing what I've learnt on the force to the Australian public, so they can better protect themselves from falling victim to crime. So with the help of some of the most respected current and former detectives and high-ranking law enforcement agents, we're going to pull back the curtain on what life is like on the force and what they've learned about how crime and criminals really work. These are real stories from real detectives.
Was sort of in between murder investigations, I suppose I'd put it, and was asked to go into a room full of boxes and to have a read of the statements in there and see if I could see anything worth looking at, something different. That wasn't unusual for that to happen, where to get a fresh set of eyes to look at an old cold case. The case that was in there that I read was the Beaumont abductions back in 1966. Then I decided to leave the police and went into private enterprise. And I worked for a large organisation as an in-house investigator for some years, and then decided to go freelance on my own. So I left and became a private investigator in 1996. I received a phone call from a gentleman who I didn't know. His name was Stuart Mullins. Stuart, it seems, had been investigating the Beaumont children. When he told me what he was about, I thought, oh yeah, here we go again. We'd seen lots and lots of these people when I was in the major crime squad, trying to solve these old crimes. I became involved with the matter, but on the proviso that he understood that initially I'd be doing everything that I could to prove that everything that he had found was wrong. He was more than happy for me to approach it in that way. From there, we took up the job of reading everything that Stuart had. And just to give you a brief overview, if I can take a step back now to 1966, when the children were at the Collie Reserve in Glenelg. Children had to get the bus to the Collie Reserve. Their mother was a bit reluctant because it was going to be a very hot day, but allowed them to go. She gave in to the kids wanting to be down the beach. That morning, the 2 younger children, Anna and Grant, had been teasing Jane about having a boyfriend. And they were saying to the mum, in little child terms, Jane's got a boyfriend, Jane's got a boyfriend. The mother sort of put that off as just being silly kids. It was nothing. But it might have become important later. So she gave the children a few shillings to go down to the beach that day, a few shillings for the bus fares, and they had to be back on the 12 o'clock bus. And to get the 12 noon bus back from the reserve, that got them away before the heat of the day, the real heat of the day, and got them home. They had money to buy lunch, which they would usually do at a place called Wenzel's Pie Shop. So she gave them enough money for that. And the last she saw them was turning the corner and waving when going down the road or down the street to the bus stop. When the children arrived in the beach area, Glenelg, they were seen by the local postman, and they waved at him and said, "Hello, Postie." Now, these three little kids were three lovely little kids, apparently. Jane was an exceptional student, an incredibly bright girl. She was only 9 years old, but was really a mother to the children because Mr. and Mrs. Beaumont were quite social in the lifestyle, and quite often Jane would be looking after the kids at the house. We later found a good friend of Jane's, who was a childhood friend during this period with her, who told us much, much more about the characters of the three of them. But Jane was the mother, if you like, and would do anything to protect her siblings. She adored them. Anna was a bright, cheerful little girl who liked to sing and dance and make people happy. And little Grant was just 4 years old and just a lovely little boy, apparently. It wasn't surprising to the postman when the kids had waved at him and started saying, "Hello, Postie," in a friendly manner, because that's the sort of kids they were. We know that they went to the reserve, and when they went to the reserve, they put the clothes down in the grassed area and went down to the water, where they frolicked around and played for a while. They then come back and were seen to walk towards the towels and stuff that were on the reserve. But there was a man lying down on his towel, and something that Mrs. Beaumont found really, really strange was that his two youngest children immediately went over to him and started speaking to him in a rather friendly way. Soon after, joined by Jane, who did the same. They ended up playing games with the man, spraying water on the man, and just having a bit of fun. The people who were there, who were seeing all this, thought he must be maybe their uncle or some family member that were quite friendly with him. And at one stage, the man had come back to the clothing that was sitting on a small bench and said, "Has anybody seen anyone near our clothing? Our money's been nicked." So the money being Jane's purse. With pedophiles, one of the things they do, well, after they've groomed, is they get a way of getting the children under their control. We believe the stealing of the money, that the money was never stolen by anyone other than the man at the reserve, and that it was his way of getting control of the children. They were then dependent on him for getting home, including for getting lunch, perhaps. So no one had seen anyone going near the clothes, which is unusual because they're all in pretty close proximity. Soon after that event, the children and the man all walked away in the direction of the changing room. They weren't seen after that until the children arrived at Wenzel's Bakery. Now, the kids left just before 12, left the reserve. I was seen at Wenzel's Bakery at about 20 to 25 past 12, about a half an hour after they'd left the beach. They had a £1 note when they arrived at Wenzel's Bakery. Now, bear in mind that they had left home with a few shillings and arrived at Wenzel's after the money had been stolen with a £1 note. So a £1 note in today's money would be worth about $39 to $40. A massive amount of money for three little children. But that's what they turned up at Wenzel's with. At Wenzel's, they also bought 5 pasties, a pie, 3 large bottles of lemonade for 3 little children. Where was the rest of that food going? Where did they get the £1 note from? The lady at Wenzel's knew the children from seeing them coming in, and they'd never ever been there before with a £1 note. Their mother had never given them a £1 note. as I say, a very large amount of money. The pound note remained a mystery for a very long time, so much so that one of the detectives on the case at the time, Detective William Thomas Cook, who just happened to be the man that put me into the room to read the files, he was then a senior sergeant when I met him, he had said in the media that the pound note is the clue. If we can work out who gave them the pound note, we know who we're looking at for the abduction. For a long, long time, they could never find that out. We believe we have.
So the sighting at the bakery at around 12:30 on the day of the abduction, that was the last time we know of that anybody independent saw the 3 children.
Up until our investigation, yes. The lead up to the point of our involvement was dead. There was nothing. For years and years and years, there were suspects arose. Nothing ever came of the suspects. One of the suspects was Derek Percy, who was probably every unsolved crime involving children was laid at Percy's doorstep. I don't know how much he did or how much was true, but they could prove nothing against Percy, and other suspects over time that they've had went nowhere. They were named for some reason, but nothing concrete, not even good circumstantial evidence came up. So it was a bit of a cold trail for many, many years until, as I say, we got involved and started digging up some stuff. After the publication of the book, Alan had been contacted by a lot of people, and one of them stood out, and that was a lady called Angela. And Angela told a story of being married to a man called Hayden Fips. Hayden would show really serious signs of having been abused. She spoke to him about it, and he was reluctant to speak about it, but eventually he did open up and told her that his father had been raping him since he was 4 years old. His father was a very wealthy industrialist called Harry Fips. Harry was the owner of a large factory in South Australia called Cast Alloy. So with that information, she also said that one evening whilst watching television together, she and Hayden, there had been a program on about the abduction of the Beaumont children. And Hayden told her that he felt his father had something to do with it, but wouldn't say much more. She put all that in the back of her mind, and she told us that her opinion of Harry was that he was weird. He was strange. She told us about Harry had a satin fetish. That is where he wore, touched, saw, felt satin of particular colours. He would become very sexually aroused. He knew he was about to be raped as he would hear the swish of the satin his father was wearing as his father walked down the landing in the corridor to come to his bedroom to rape him. Quite a tragic story to tell, and a tragic story for that man. So from there, I decided that I needed to find Hayden and to speak to him. Inquiries thus far had shown that Hayden had developed problems with alcohol and had taken drugs and had developed psychiatric issues. He wasn't mad, but he was damaged. There was no doubt about that. We found Hayden in Queensland, living in a gentleman's sort of a care place. And he wasn't anything like I was expecting. I was expecting to find a raving lunatic or a drunk or a druggie or something. He was nothing like that. The man I found was tall, well-built, well-presented, clean, and very intelligent, stone-cold sober. and very, very lucid and literate in his conversation with me. I took him away from that place to the hotel I was staying in. We spent 2 or 3 hours there together, and I did an audio-taped interview with Hayden. It started by telling me that he didn't wish to talk about it, but when we sat and talked casually, I think we built a bit of a rapport, and he then opened up to me and started telling me everything. That statement has formed a very large part of the investigation that followed. We also found Hayden's cousin, Peter is his name, and Peter was very, very helpful in as much as he remembers the time, and he was Hayden's best friend and remained to Hayden's death as Hayden's best friend and confidant. He had no time for Harry, and he told us about the fetish stuff and about Harry's behaviour. We spoke to other friends of Harry's, who are now obviously senior men, and they could remember that they loved hanging around with Hayden when he was a small boy because if Harry wanted you to leave him alone to his whatever it is he wanted to do, he would give each of them a £1 note to go. Each of them. So if there's 4 of them, that was £4 he would give away. We heard a lot of stories like this, and it turned out that the £1 note giveaways, we feel was almost like Harry's calling card. This is me. I'm successful. I can afford to do this. And he gave out pound notes. So, as I say, the inquiry continued and lots of stuff was discussed with lots and lots of people, some indicating that Harry was the way some we feel he was, and others that wouldn't accept that. Some members of the family still don't accept it, which is fine. I understand the dilemma. So let's go back to the 26th of January at the Collie Reserve. The children have left. Never seen till they get to Wenzels, and then never seen again.
I get the impression that Harry Fips became a suspect retrospectively. Was he ever a suspect in the initial investigation in the mid to late 60s, Bill?
That's a very good question, Brent. The answer is no, because back in 1966, we looked for dirty old men. You're always told, look out for the dirty old man. Your parents worried about the dirty old man. Harry Fips was the antithesis of a dirty old man. He was a tall, well-dressed, clean, and I'm told smelled nicely, man. He was anything but a dirty old man. He was a multimillionaire, lived in a very beautiful home, drove a large Pontiac Parisienne car, which plays a part later in the story. For quite some time, thanks to media misinformation, they were looking for a surfy type guy with bleached blonde hair, long hair, as being the man at the Collie Reserve. That was proven to the media within a couple of days of the publication in 1966 to be incorrect. But even recently, the media has still put up a description of a blonde-haired surfy. So the general population for a very long time, guided by what the media said, were looking for entirely the wrong person anyway. They were looking for a surfy type, not an urbane businessman.
It's an interesting point that you make, Bill. I think, for those listening, it's important to remind perhaps even some of the younger listeners that in the 60s, the whole public view of child sexual abuse and who would do that and who wouldn't, we've learnt a lot since that time. And you're quite right. It was not seen as the actions of a well-to-do person. If a person was a celebrity or they were wealthy or they were a politician or a professional, they didn't meet the perceived criteria of somebody who would be interested in children. Of course, now, and for quite some time, with the benefit of hindsight, we are aware that paedophilia and all the associated evils that go with that. They don't fall into those neat little boxes of people. But this would have been knowledge at the time that the likes of a Harry Fips would just not have been on the radar, would he?
He just did not fit. We know now, of course, people like Jimmy Savile, Rolf Harris. My goodness, Rolf Harris, who would have believed that? The father, the uncle, the family friend, the priest, the minister, anybody. It was just anyone, but not then. Not then. Those people were not capable of it. And in fact, they were probably the leaders of the pack, as it turns out. So yes, that's the whole thing. It was just everybody was looking for the dirty old man, and the dirty old man didn't exist at all. The man at the Collie Reserve was not a dirty old man.
Just with regards to circumstantial as well, Bill, and please pull me up if I'm jumping too far ahead. He worked close to there. His business was close to there. Was his home residence close to there as well in Glenelg?
His business was 5 kilometres from the beach. His home was 190 metres from the Collie Reserve where they'd been with the children, just across a grassed area and up a street. And his house was there, so it was very, very close, very proximate. So I think from here we could pick up on Hayden's part, what Hayden told us. So he'd been working as a part-time little job over the summer months at the Glenelg bowling alley where they did 10-pin bowling. And he'd come home at lunchtime. It was a very hot day. It was high 30s in temperature and quite humid, and been like that for a while. He came home, and in the backyard he had what he called a cubby. But he went in there and had a sly smoke. You remember in those days, 14 or 15-year-old boys wouldn't smoke in front of their parents to get a smack. So he was a smoker, and he had a sly smoke. And while he was doing it, his father, Harry, came out to the car and started to load bags into the car. Harry was in the process of loading the bags when the back gate opened and 3 little children walked in. They spoke to Harry for a while and then went inside the house. They were in there for a little while, and Harry came back out, finished putting a couple of bags in the car and drove off. Hayden went inside the house, and the children weren't there. There was no sign of any upset, no smells of anything untoward that's going on, and the front door was left wide open. So he presumed that the children had gone out through the front door. That was the last he saw of them. But he did tell me that he felt that the children had been picked up by Harry and taken to the Castleroy cottages, his cottage, and that's where things happened, and he said they buried it in the sandpit.
Coming up, the stunning new development around the potential burial site of the Beaumont children.
There was nothing there to throw in the hole. Why dig the hole? We need all those things answered, so why dig the hole to put nothing in it? It doesn't make sense.
So we're talking now 40 years. From 2006 on with your involvement, were there some key findings from that point forward, Bill?
There was lots of snippets of information and confirmation about the pound note habits, confirmation about Harry's fetish. Information came in. My cousin works for a government body over there, and he'd brought the book called The Satin Man that was written by Stuart and Alan with my input on the investigation side of the book. He'd read that, and he'd taken it to work while he was reading it, and he'd left it on his desk and gone out. And when he came back in, there was a note on the book from one of his female colleagues saying that she used to live across from the Castleroy factory and she had a story to tell. He spoke to her and was so concerned he contacted me immediately. I flew to Melbourne and I met with this lady who at the time was a young teenager, maybe 13 years old, and lived in a street called Moringi Avenue, which is directly across from the Castleeye factory. She also told us that in the mornings they would hitch the little dresses up because it was that time, in the 70s, and go to school. They'd wait till they left home to do that. And they had a man who would always stand at the corner of the Castleeye factory and he'd stand there every morning and watch them as they went to school. And he'd smile at them and they would think he's a friendly man, and he'd smile and wave back. And he was always there, just outside the office door of Castleeye. One day, our witness was working in a friend's house at Kincaid Avenue doing her homework, and it was getting a bit late, and she had to run home. She had to be home before her father got home. Her father's a strict disciplinarian who, if she did anything wrong, would beat her. So there's very, very serious child abuse going on there, physical abuse, not sexual. Anyhow, she had gone to her friend's house and had to get home and had come down from Kincaid Avenue down Streeters Road towards Moringi Avenue where she'd be home. On the way down, she saw the man who they would see every morning, but this time he'd left the front of the building and walked up Streeter Road towards where she was. He was standing by a tree. She was quite taken with the man because he was telling her what a beautiful girl she was and he'd seen her and how lovely she was, and etc. And he steered her across the street. The thing she remembered about the man was that he smelled really nice. He didn't smell like other men were dirty and Harry looked after himself. He really did. But he took her across the street, and across the street from the Castleeye factory is a piece of vacant ground. And there he raped her. She didn't tell her mother, because if he told her mother, the mother would tell her father, who would blame her for it happening and beat her. So she kept it secret for quite some time. It played on her mind for a few more years, but she stayed there, and eventually she left home. She'd become a bit of a wild child and went and lived with a family in a different area. Her behaviour was such that the people who were taking care of her were very concerned and spoke to her about why she was the way she was. And she described to them the rape, what had happened to her. They called the police. Police officer arrived, spoke to her about it, and told her that if she was to go ahead with it, she'd have to go to court. She had no evidence to prove that there had been a rape because it was so many years ago and nothing was taken forensically that it could be examined to help prove the rape. Be her word against the man's, and she'd get a really hard time in court if she wanted to go ahead with it. If she wanted to go ahead with it, she could, but this is what she faced. As a result of him telling her that, she said, no, I don't want to go ahead with it. And she finished. One day she and a friend, in recent times, had been watching TV, and it was after we started our, I call it agitation, in relation to Harry Fips being the suspect. And his photograph flashed up on the screen on TV, and she recognised him. She didn't know his name up to this point. She recognised him as the man who had raped her. She'd never forgotten him. And she said to her friend, that's the guy that raped me.
There's been over time, Bill, as you would know better than most, no shortage, you've mentioned one name already, no shortage of suspects, call them what you will in this case. Suffice to say, you believe that Harry Fips, there's enough circumstantial evidence to point that he is most likely responsible for the abduction murder of these children. He passed away around 2003, 2004. Bill, where does this case sit for you now? You know, you first walked into that room back in '88, where the case at that point was 22 years old. You left the police, became a private investigator. You've picked it up again in the early 2000s. More recently, as you've said, there was extra emphasis and interviews done in 2018. I'm interested, Bill, as an ex-police officer, where for you this whole case, this has become a very big part of your life. Where does this sit now for you, and where do you see you taking this?
Well, it's not just me, it's Stuart and myself. Stuart's been a very able partner in all of this, very capable, and has done amazing work, I have to say that. We're at a point now where two young men came up as a result of reading The Sat Man, came and told us that when they were young men, like 15 and 17, they'd dug a hole at Castleloy. The background story is their father was a plumber, a jobbing plumber, and used to do some work at Castleloy from time to time. And he'd been asked to find somebody to dig a hole at Castleloy. Now we're talking about the 29th of January and the 30th of January, 1966. The 2 days, about 2 or 3 days after the event being the 26th. So their father came home and spoke to two boys who used to do, I don't know if you were a Boy Scout, but they had the old Bob a job thing, where you'd go and do a little job and get a couple of shillings for doing it. So they decided that they would be happy to dig the hole. So on the day in question, they went up to the back gate at Castleloy and were admitted to the premises by a man who had the keys to Castleloy because the factory, remember, is closed down. They were let into the factory area and indicated an area where this man wanted them to dig a hole. And he was driving a big green flash, lots of mirrors, American car. Harry drove a green Pontiac Parisienne. He indicated where he wanted them to dig. They started digging a hole. They dug the first day, and Harry, or the man, would come back and forth, look in the hole, go back and sit in his car for a while, drive off, come back. And he appeared to be very agitated, very upset and agitated, and nervy. After the first day, he told him the hole wasn't deep enough, dig deeper. The dimensions were about 6 feet long, 3 feet wide, and it had to be about 6 feet deep. The two boys afterwards always laughingly called it the grave, not realising what it might have been. So the sides kept falling in there. Remember, it was sand, and it's very important now. It was all sand, and the sides kept falling in as they're digging it, which made it really, really hard. But they went back the next day, and they continued to dig, and the man had let them in, come and look, come and look. Eventually he said, that's enough, and he paid them. Have a guess what he paid them in? £1 notes. And told them, and I won't give you the exact language on air, but told them to go away and don't ever come back there. Now, they could date this really well, these two guys, because one of them was going to university in the beginning of February to start his career as a teacher, to start learning, do a degree as a teacher in teaching. And his brother that spoke to us initially was like 15, so he was 2 years younger than his older brother was going to university at 17 and a half or whatever to be a teacher. And that was 2 or 3 days after they dug the hole. That's how they could date it so well. They never put two and two together, that it might have been so close and proximate to the Beaumonts. Because, as I say, Harry was never a suspect. He was a big industrialist, a big rich man. He just wanted a hole. But what did bother them over the years that followed was why they dug the hole. There was nothing there to put in the hole. And if he had the hole to put something in, why didn't he get them to put it in, then refill the hole? So as it was, they left this guy with this bloody great hole to put stuff into, then fill it up on 39-degree days. Just didn't make sense. They were there. Why not just get them to do it, chuck it in and fill it up?
And with future excavations of that area, clearly nothing was found, or was there something found? If there was somebody buried there back in the 60s, and there was an excavation done of that area, I think you're going to say around 2018. Were there any findings at all, Bill?
Well, what happened was we fought and kicking and squealing with SAPOL to get them to do something. We got them out there, convinced them back then to have a go at digging this hole. Got down, halfway down, there was animal bones, a scattering of animal bones, which is not surprising in that area to have found those. Went down, further down, there was nothing. So we thought, well, maybe they've been taken out, maybe we were wrong, maybe there was nothing put in the holes. But why would you dig these holes so deep and so big and put nothing in? Didn't make sense. So we thought, well, we'll keep an eye on it, we'll keep working on it. We did that, and we found out of recent times that the land that was dug was fill. Prior to 1966, the level of the land where the boys dug the original hole was about 5.5 feet deeper than the land level now. The level now has been raised, elevated, by about 5.5 feet to 6 feet. And people who worked there, who knew the area, told us that they remember that after 1966, Harry had people truck in truckload after truckload of soil to elevate that land by that 5.5, 6 feet. A massive job. They could never work out why he did it. It made no sense. It didn't need to be done. In fact, it was a pain in the rear end. But he did it. So we only found out that, and we could confirm it when we looked at the Channel 7 footage. We could see that the spoil that had been dug up was a brown soil. It wasn't sand. Where they finished, and you could see the police officers at the end standing in the depths of the hole, where they'd finished, about 6 feet down, was sand. We've confirmed that with the Lands Office, that the land had been 5 or so deep, 5, 6 feet deeper down in 1966 than it was in 2018 and is now. So what we're saying is we haven't finished the job. We were 6 feet too shallow. You dug down 6 feet in 2018. Well, that only takes you to the starting point as it was in 1966.
So the obvious question there, Bill, playing devil's advocate, is why did somebody at that point say, well, okay, this is where the sand is, we need to go down another 6 feet with a bobcat or something like that? It would be a fairly easy job, or...
We're saying it because the job hasn't been finished. If it was good enough to dig the hole in 2018, to that, I think there might be something down there, it's good enough, let's dig. If it was good enough to do it then it's good enough to do it now to finish the job, because now we know they didn't go deep enough. So the reasons for digging in 2018 are still there. So it's just we're 6 feet too short. We need to go deeper into the ground.
Would it be your belief, Bill, that if they went a further 6 feet down into the sand, that they may well find the remains of the children?
I couldn't say that. I couldn't say that. What we need to know is, why did they dig the hole in 1966? All the circumstances to point to something untoward, some untoward reason for those holes. We don't know. As the boy said, there was nothing there to throw in the hole. Why dig the hole? If there was something to throw in the hole, why not throw it in and we'll dig it and refill it? We need all those things answered. So why dig the hole to put nothing in it? It doesn't make sense. So I'm not saying the kids are down there. We might get down 6 feet and find a dead cow. We don't know. But we need to know why the hole was dug. And coincidentally, 2 days after the children had been taken, very hot weather where if they were taken and they were killed, the bodies would have been decaying badly and smelling badly. I don't believe the murder was planned. I believe it happened, and then he's left with the bodies to try and do something with, and they're going off in relation to the heat, the decomposing and the smell. He had to do something with them. And the hole might have been it.
Bill, thank you so much for your service, for your time, both in the police and since then working on this. This has been a real life work of yours, and I hope, as I'm sure on behalf of the listeners, that you are able to take that one or two further steps, and we can have you back in here with perhaps some conclusion to this intriguing case.
Brent, can I just give a plug to the book? Because if anybody, the listeners, want to know more, there's a lot in the book. If you don't mind, it's called Unmasking the Killer of the Missing Beaumont Children. It's not a plug to sell the book, but we want to get the information to as many people as we can possibly get it to, because someone out there knows something. We want them to read this and say, I know about that, I'm going to talk.
Crime Insiders Detectives is a LiSTNR original production. It's hosted by me, Brent Sanders, produced by Ed Gooden, and sound designed and imaged by Link Kelly.